Welcome to CivilNet. On June 7, Turkey's population headed to the polls to elect a new parliament. 4 parties were able to cross the 10% threshold as required by Turkey's constitution. The leading Justice and Development Party, otherwise known as AKP, was not able to secure a simple majority since 2002 when it first came to power. Now joining me from Istanbul to talk about what has been taking place in Turkey since the elections on June 7 is BBC journalist and commentator Guney Yildiz. Guney, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you for having me.
We've been following the elections, as has the world, and for many commentators and journalists and people living in Turkey, obviously, we felt that we saw democracy in action. For the first time in a historical watershed, the Kurdish-led or Kurdish-based HDP was able to cross the 10% threshold and enter parliament. And yet this has left Turkey hanging in the balance because the stability that the population had become accustomed to since AKP came to power now seems to be very tenuous. What is the situation today in Turkey's political landscape?
Well, Maria, it's quite a change after 13 years of stable government under AK Party, that AK Party lost its parliamentary majority, and it's almost 11 days since the election took place, and there is no coalition government in the horizon. There are 2 possibilities. As you said, there are 4 parties who passed the threshold and in the parliament. The main opposition party is secularist nationalist CHP party, Republican People's Party. And apart from them, there are two other parties: liberal Kurdish Turkish opposition HDP, People's Democracy Party, and ultranationalist Nationalist Action Party. Well, many commentators are saying that the best possible bet for coalition is between AK Party, ruling AK Party, and ultranationalist Nationalist Action Party. We know that there has been some negotiations even before the elections, and AK Party has offered some ministerial posts to Nationalist Action Party, but we cannot rule out a coalition government between AK Party and main opposition party as well. And many commentators, including the business community, European Union, and even liberals and Kurds, prefer a coalition government between the main opposition party, the secularist nationalists, and the AK Party. People believe that in this way it will limit AK Party and will end the free rein that's been given to AK Party in terms of foreign policy, in terms of domestic policies, in terms of other social policies. And these 2 parties will limit each other, and there will be more like a stable and weaker but more diverse government.
Yeah, certainly. There was a poll that was conducted, I think, just a few days after the elections, because many people said that, voters wanted to punish AKP, especially Erdogan, for his, for his ambitions and his control on power, that if there were to be elections today, that AKP would get more votes by the population because, as you said, they want that stability. But just returning back to Erdogan, I was reading an article where Erdogan was apparently, trying to act as a mediator between these 4 parties. And this has created some tension. I think it was CHP leader Kılıçdaroğlu who said that, Erdogan shouldn't be involved in the process. But is he in fact trying to act as a mediator between these 4 parties?
Well, presidential post, as you know, Maria, in Turkey is supposed to be above the politics. But everybody knows that President Erdogan has in mind, he was almost rallying on the streets in the upcoming, up until to the election day almost, for the AK Party. He didn't make it explicit, but people assumed that he was rallying for AK Party, and AK Party's people believe that Erdogan was not in the ballot box, but people believe everything about this election was about him. It was about giving the AK Party majority in order to amend the constitution to give Erdogan an executive presidency. So in that sense, Erdogan being a mediator is not exactly received as he's not exactly received as a neutral mediator between the parties. But as you said, people on the street think that they've taught AK Party a lesson. And I was on the streets talking to people, for example, people who moved away from AK Party, voted for ultranationalists, or moved away from AK Party, or voted as other parties, or didn't vote for AK Party. They said, we taught them a lesson. We taught that him that he cannot have, he cannot rule power, rule the country alone as a sole power. But if there will be a snap election, I'll vote for him, because I think they've got the message from us. And even some minority people from minority Alevi sect, for example, they were telling me that yes, they are happy to see Erdogan's executive presidency is blocked, but they're not happy to see that there's instability, political instability in the country. And even if they were telling me that we won't be unhappy to see AK Party back in power, but not as powerful as it was before.
Sure, sure. People are saying that Erdogan might have lost the battle, but he certainly hasn't lost the war yet in Turkey's politics. Now, there's two scenarios. Either the 2 or 3 of the parties will be able to form a coalition government, or there will be a minority government, or a coalition will fall apart and there will be snap elections in the country. If they were able to form a coalition government that was workable, will this impact Erdogan's policies in the region, his foreign policy, his relations with Turkey, with the Islamic State? Because obviously what the AKP wanted was to also hold a referendum to give more powers to the presidency. Now that hope has been dashed. So will this impact, this will, I'm thinking, impact the region. What is your opinion on that?
Well, up until recently, AK Party has almost a free reign. It had a parliamentary majority, it had almost a presidential post, Erdogan close to being the founder of that party. AK Party had full control of Turkish intelligence, good control of Turkish army, has a huge media base, and also a bourgeoisie loyal to AK Party too. So it has amassed a lot of power in its hands. But in a coalition government, the government will have to share ministerial posts with its coalition partner, and losing parliamentary majority will make it more difficult for AK Party to pass laws through parliament. So this might end its free reign in free hand in foreign policy, for example. Some parties are accusing AK Party of being too close to Islamist militants in Syria, including, I mean, people are not much accusing AK Party of helping ISIS at this point. There were some claims before, but they're saying AK Party is helping other extremist Islamist groups in Syria. If they are in a coalition, they will be in coalition with the main opposition, Secularist Nationalist Party. We'll see that they'll make much more noise about this. And the Kurdish Turkish liberal left-wing opposition being in parliament will also mean that they will make a lot of noise against what they perceive as AK Party's help to Islamist militants in Syria. So we can expect a little bit of change in its foreign policy. And also with regard to, for example, Egypt, with regard to the Turkish policy towards Israel, we can expect some change there as well. Because in the last 1.5 years, Turkey went through 3 elections. So it was an election cycle period. And in Turkey, the tradition is that foreign policy is not as important as domestic policy, obviously. But foreign policy has become kind of a tool for the ruling party and other parties to score points in domestic policy. So when Erdogan, for example, was talking about Egypt and the toppling of President Morsi there, he's actually talking about his situation in Turkey and pointing to people that, well, there are other people who are trying to topple me, try to stage a coup d'etat against me. So foreign policy was a tool kind of in domestic policies. And if there's a stable coalition government, we'll see that that government will rule for 4 years. So they won't be possibly using domestic foreign policy as a tool in domestic policy.
Yes, certainly. I think it's going to be an important development, certainly in the last several years as the Middle East has been unraveling, you know, usually at the cost of human life and security. It's going to be interesting to see how that develops. From what I understand, on June 23 or 24, those who have been elected to parliament will take the oath of office, and then according to Turkey's constitution, they require 45 days to form a government. So we'll be heading into the late summer before we can understand how that's going to be playing out. Just as a final note, I was saying earlier how democracy is working in Turkey. These elections were also interesting. Aside from the HDP, the Kurdish-based party getting into parliament, we also saw minorities. There were 3 Armenians, a Yazidi, and an Assyrian who were also elected to parliament representing different parties. Can we say that there is a fundamental shift taking place in that respect?
Well, just to add that list of minorities, Maria, we can also maybe mention there are more women, for example, in parliament than it was before. And it was an important development that not only the Kurdish-based HDP fielding an Armenian candidate, which was normal given their policies, but also the Secularist National CHP and AK Party has fielded candidates who made into parliament as well. That's certainly a welcoming development for many minority people in Turkey, because the discrimination against those minorities happens in several levels. When you have prominent figures in parliament, in public life, you'll see the level of discrimination against those communities going down. And as you know, the Kurdish-based HDP has this policy of fielding minorities, and they have this policy of having a co-chairmanship, one chairpersonship, one female and one male chair for almost all administrative positions. So they affected the general way of doing politics in Turkey. They changed the political communication to a certain level, and other parties had to follow this example as well. And we have to note that up until recently, the Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoğlu had one of the chief advisors of Prime Minister Davutoğlu was an Armenian Catholic, Etienne Mahçupyan. So we are seeing more and more prominent figures in public life from those minorities.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the Kurdish minority in Turkey being suppressed for decades, all of a sudden is now being the progressive force in the country in terms of, in terms of fielding women candidates for parliament. Guney, thank you so much for joining us and helping us to understand what's been taking place. I suspect that in the next month and a half or so, we'll be talking to you again to see how the coalition government process is taking place in Turkey. So thank you for joining us.
It will be a pleasure. Thank you.
I'd like to remind our viewers that my guest was BBC journalist and commentator Guney Yildiz. He joined us from Istanbul. Stay with CivilNet.